All right, let's dive right in. Today we are tackling some of the biggest mysteries in human history. We're talking to burning bush, angelic visions, ancient spirits, and we're going to ask a really wild question. What if these weren't miracles at all? What if they were just a branch of physics we're only now starting to understand?
I know, it sounds like the beginning of a really weird joke, right? But seriously, this question is at the absolute heart of what we're exploring today. We're going to unpack a pretty radical hypothesis that suggests all of these seemingly disconnected, supernatural events might actually be different eyewitness accounts of the exact same natural phenomenon.
You know, every single culture has its stories. When our ancestors were faced with something they just couldn't explain, a strange light in the sky, a feeling of a presence, they did what we all do. They tried to make sense of it using the tools they had. They interpreted it through their belief systems. They called them gods, or angels, demons, spirits. But what if those weren't divine messages? What if it was all just garbled data? What if we've been trying to translate a signal using the completely wrong language?
This is such a brilliant way to think about it. For ages, people saw solar eclipse and, logically thought, a giant dragon is eating the sun. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? But then along comes the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras. He uses reason, he uses observation, and he figures out, oh, it's just the moon's shadow. Simple. He replaced a terrifying myth with science. So the question for us is, can we do that again, but for miracles?
Okay, so let's set the stage. For the next few minutes, we're going to treat these ancient stories not just as matters of faith, but as a collection of eyewitness reports. Think of it as observational data that has just been sitting there, waiting for the right theory to come along.
And just look at the specific physical descriptions we have. A fire that gives off brilliant light but doesn't actually produce any destructive heat. Little tendrils of flame that can land on people without, burning them. A luminous globe that dances around in the sky. And beings that are literally described as being made of smokeless fire. If you strip away the religious interpretation for just a second, what you're left with is a really consistent set of bizarre physical events that seem to demand a physical explanation.
And that right there is the big pivot. This is the whole point. What if, just like Anaxagoras in that eclipse, we've just been missing the correct scientific framework this whole time? What if these ancient accounts are actually describing something very real, something physical, that we're only now getting the tools to even begin to understand?
And that leads us directly to the proposed solution. It's a bold, and I've got to say a completely fascinating theory that tries to pull all of these different events together under one single scientific umbrella.
So the theory we're digging into today comes from an independent researcher named Alfred, and his whole argument is that we shouldn't just dismiss these ancient stories as fiction or myth. Instead, he thinks we should be treating them as a hugely valuable, basically untapped data set for modern physics, and his big idea is called the dark plasma hypothesis. Okay, let's take a deep breath and break this down, because it's a massive concept. The basic idea goes like this. Our planet might be gravitationally tied to a twinning planet that we just can't see, a dark Earth made entirely of dark matter spinning right here alongside us. And on this dark Earth, life didn't evolve from carbon like us, it evolved from complex organized plasma. And these plasma beings are usually totally invisible to us, but every now and then they interact with our world. So the obvious question is, how does an invisible dark matter being suddenly become visible? Well, Alfred calls it the dark ionization process. Here's how it works. The entity basically compresses itself, which massively increases its density. This makes it collide with way more atoms in our atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. These collisions are energetic enough to knock electrons loose from those atoms. This process ionizes the air all around the being, creating this temporary visible shell of ordinary plasma. And that is what gives off the light and the energy that we can see and feel. It's the bridge between their invisible world and our visible one. Now, it's really important to get this next part. When we hear the word plasma, most of us immediately think of the sun, something incredibly hot, incredibly destructive. But this hypothesis is all about cold plasma. This is a state of matter where the particles are all energized and they're emitting light, but the overall temperature stays low. The light from a fluorescent tube in your office is a perfect example. It's super bright, but you can go ahead and touch the glass. It's not hot. That distinction is absolutely critical to this whole idea.
Okay, so we have the theory on the table. Now for the real test, right? How well does it actually hold up when we apply it back to those original mysteries? Does it actually explain the strange, specific details that have puzzled people for thousands of years?
Let's go right back to the burning bush. The central paradox is written right there in the text. The bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up.
For any normal fire, that's a complete contradiction. It's impossible. But for cold plasma, well, it's a perfect description. Cold plasma produces that bright light, that luminosity, without the high temperatures that would have instantly incinerated the bush. The miracle suddenly becomes a textbook property of cold plasma.
Okay, how about the Pentecost event? The text describes two really strange things. First, a violent wind that comes out of nowhere. Well, according to this theory, that lines up perfectly with something called an electric wind, which is a known effect when plasma ionizes the air around it. And second, the tongues of fire that settled on each of the apostles. Plasma is naturally drawn to magnetic fields. The hypothesis suggests these were little tendrils of plasma being attracted to the powerful biomagnetic fields our own bodies generate, especially around our heads.
And this analysis of the Fatima event, which was seen by 70,000 people, is just incredible. The dazzling globe of light they saw, that would be an ovoid plasma body in a high-energy state called arc mode. The sudden wind, there's that electric wind again. The fact that it descended and was warm enough to dry people's wet clothes, that's explained by the infrared radiation from a large plasma body. And the shifting multicolored lights? Well, complex plasmas, sometimes called dusty plasmas, are known to be thermochromatic, meaning they literally change color as their temperature changes. It's wild. Every single bizarre detail reported by thousands of witnesses corresponds to a known, observable property of plasma.
So you can see how the hypothesis fits these major Judeo-Christian events remarkably well. But its real power, its real potential, is in how broad it is. The theory suggests this isn't just about one culture's miracles. It's about a global phenomenon, something described everywhere from Islamic texts talking about jinns all the way to modern ghost stories.
I mean, just look at this direct quote from the Qur'an. The term plasma wasn't even coined by science until the 1920s. So centuries before that, how else would you possibly describe an ionized gas that glows and gives off light without actually burning anything? Smokeless fire is, well, it's an astonishingly accurate pre-scientific description of plasma.
Now think about all the common traits we hear about in stories of both jinns and ghosts. They pass through walls, they appear and disappear in a blink, they float, they mess with our TVs and radios. From a plasma perspective, these aren't supernatural powers at all. A low-density electromagnetic being should be able to pass right through the empty space between atoms in a solid wall. It could change its visibility by altering its plasma frequency, and of course it would interfere with electronics. The cold spots and weird winds are, yet again, just direct byproducts of that same ionization process.
Okay, now this is where it all gets really compelling, because we're about to connect ancient folklore directly to a modern physics experiment. There's a real experiment deep under a mountain in Italy called DAMA-Libra, and for years it has detected a seasonal ebb and flow of dark matter passing through our planet. This dark matter wind, as they call it, peaks every single year around June. That's when Earth, in its orbit, is moving in the same direction as the sun's path through the galaxy, so we're flying head-on into the stream.
So that leads us to this incredible question. Is it just a coincidence that so many cultures, like the Chinese with their Hungry Ghost Festival, have this ancient belief that the veil between our world and the spirit world is at its thinnest in the late summer? Could this tradition actually be a cultural memory, an observation of a real cyclical increase in dark matter density, which, if the hypothesis is right, would lead to more frequent appearances of these plasma beings? It's a pretty mind-blowing correlation to think about.
So let's step back for a second and pull all of these different threads together. What is the big picture here? What emerges when you apply this single, unifying hypothesis to so many different global mysteries?
Across every culture, across every time period, the actual physical descriptions of these supernatural encounters share the exact same characteristics. They glow with their own light. They almost always appear as orbs, globes, or just shapeless forms, and they are consistently, always, associated with strange winds, sudden cold spots, and weird electrical phenomena. The patterns are they're undeniable.
And that really is the ultimate takeaway here. What J. Alfred's dark plasma hypothesis does is reframe human history. It suggests that the Torah, the Bible, the Qur'an, and thousands of years of global folklore aren't just collections of myths. They could be a vast, scientifically priceless data set, filtered through different cultural lenses, all documenting humanity's long, confusing, and sometimes terrifying relationship with a form of life that has always been right here with us, just out of sight.
And that's the thought I really want to leave you with. We spend so much time and so much money looking for life on other planets, gazing out into the deepest parts of the cosmos. But what if we should also be looking a little closer to home? What if the most alien life in the universe is right here,
in the very air around us, waiting at that strange intersection of ancient belief and modern physics. What else might we find if we just started looking?